This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Oral questions. Questions are hard. None have no chef.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Plan for economy and security that puts Canada first. But despite the fact the Prime Minister has known for years that Trump was threatening these tariffs, and for 3 weeks that President Trump had won the election, the only plan he has is a Zoom call. No plan to reverse his disastrous liberalization of drugs that have killed people and now threaten our borders. No plan to fix the broken borders that he caused. No plan to cancel the tax increases that will drive billions and many jobs away. Where's the plan to put Canada first?
Here.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Instead of panicking and falling back on slogans like the Leader of the Opposition, we rolled up our sleeves and we're getting to work. We're working with all the premiers, pulling together in a Team Canada approach, because that's how we defend Canadian jobs from coast to coast to coast. I spoke with Donald Trump yesterday evening, talked about how important it was for us to work together to solve some of the challenges we're facing as a continent, as countries, but also work to grow our economy, protect our workers on both sides of the border. This is the responsible, methodical approach we're taking as we move forward, while our opponent falls back on slogans and fear.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He spoke with the incoming president, and moments later, Mr. Trump put out a tweet slapping a 25% tariff on Canada. So that worked about as well as the Prime Minister's efforts on Buy America and softwood lumber, which continue to be penalized, even though the previous Conservative government got both of those things lifted. Now move over to drugs. The Prime Minister's disastrous legalization and liberalization of drugs has the Americans worried, in addition to costing 47,000 deaths in Canada. Where's the plan to stop the drugs and keep our border open to trade?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Leader of the Opposition is just making stuff up. I clearly spoke with the President of the United States an hour and a half after he put out his suggestion on tariffs. The reality is we're going to continue to work constructively with the incoming administration to protect Canadian jobs, to protect Canadian growth, to take the responsible approach that isn't steeped in partisanship, that pulls together the Team Canada approach that stands up for Canadians instead of throwing our arms up and saying all is broken like the Leader of the Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, that's even worse. The statement went out promising tariffs before they even got a chance to speak. It's kind of like him backing down on Buy America and backing down on softwood lumber, Mr. Speaker. Now let's move to the tariffs the Prime Minister wants to impose on our economy. Quadrupling the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre would cripple our economy. New tax increases on work and energy would do likewise, sending hundreds of billions of dollars south of the border. Now that Canadians are facing this economic crisis, will he at least cancel his plan to hike taxes so we can save jobs?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we see once again the Leader of the Opposition flailing and inventing stuff to try and fit his preferred attacks into his priorities. The reality is we're going to continue to work constructively with the incoming administration to do what Canada and the U.S. have always done: create prosperity together, protect jobs on both sides of the border as we grow the economy. When it comes to drugs, Mr. Speaker, we've taken serious steps on that and we'll continue to. If the Leader of the Opposition is suggesting he wants to recriminalize marijuana, let him just say that.
That's right.
Order!
You're asking your caucus if that's right?
Order. Honourable member from Regina Capel.
We need a Canada First plan to fix what the Prime Minister has broken. The first time he went head-to-head with Trump, the Prime Minister was forced into accepting humiliating concessions on agriculture, steel tariffs, and on Buy American. And that was when Canada had a stronger position thanks to a decade of low-tax, pro-job, conservative policies. After 9 years of economic vandalism, though, he's put Canada in an extremely vulnerable position. Per capita GDP is now lower than 9 years ago. Canada has the most indebted household amongst our trading partners. We have the worst housing inflation, and food prices have risen 37% here, faster here than in the U.S. Now that he's negotiating a position of weakness, why should Canadians expect anything?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Export Promotion and International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear. We will always be there to protect Canadian workers and Canadian businesses. We have been there for Canadians before when we renegotiated NAFTA. I remind the member opposite that it was the Conservatives who wanted us to capitulate during that time. But we stood strong, and that's a testament to the facts. Canada-U.S. trade is at an all-time high last year of $1.3 trillion. Canada places the highest priority on trade and the integrity of our shared border. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to working with the incoming administration.
The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
It was that Prime Minister that was forced to accept humiliating concession after concession. And now he's kneecapped Canada's economy. He's slapped a massive carbon tax here while the U.S. doesn't have one at all. Yep. He's raising taxes on investing in Canada while the U.S. is fighting to attract investment there. Exactly. He's imposed a production cap on Canadian energy, meaning Canada will produce less of what the U.S. needs to buy. Yep. There are less than 60 days left to act. It's time for the Prime Minister to put aside his partisanship, his ideology, and his ego. Will he strengthen Canada's position by cancelling his carbon tax and all tax hikes on jobs and investments?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, will take no lessons from the Conservative. Their strategy, Mr. Speaker, last time was to capitulate. On this side of the House, as the Prime Minister said, Mr. Speaker, is to take that seriously and methodically. Mr. Speaker, we have been engaging with our U.S. partner on three key things. The first one is security. Security of the border, security of the North and the Arctic, resilient supply chain when it comes to semiconductors, when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to energy, and put forward a growth plan for North America, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we'll fight for Canadians, we'll fight for industry, we'll fight for our country, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Everywhere we look, we find more evidence of economic carnage, and now we're up against the biggest economic and security superpower, and this government has no plan. We need a Canada First plan to fix what the Prime Minister broke. When he took office, our GDP per capita was 81% of the U.S.'s. Now it's fallen to 73%. It's a made-in-Canada problem, and it's not about vibes. It's driven by higher taxes, higher spending, higher regulation, and this government's economic vandalism. Faced with the threat of tariffs, when are they going to stop the vandalism and start fixing the crisis so Canadians have a chance?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, when the Conservative Party of Canada wanted us to back down during the last round of NAFTA negotiations, we stood up for Canada. We stood up for Canadian workers. Right. We stood up for the steel workers in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We stood up for Canadian auto workers. We stood up for our farmers and agricultural workers, Mr. Speaker. Right. They want to know what the plan is. We plan on doing it again and getting a win-win for Canada and the United States.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, they backed down themselves last time, and Canada has become poorer since then than Alabama. That's not a record that anybody should be proud of. Our productivity gap with the U.S. costs every Canadian $32,000 a year. Average return on investments are 35% higher in the U.S. than in Canada. Our government's plan to quadruple the carbon tax, they doubled housing prices, they increased taxes on work and investment. With the threat of crippling tariffs, will the Prime Minister end all of the tax increases so Canadians stand a chance?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have an excellent relationship with the United States, a relationship that is mutually beneficial. We do enormous amounts of trade with the United States, and the United States depends on Canada for much of its energy supply, Mr. Speaker. They want to know what the plan is. The plan is to continue to work with the United States in order to protect Canadian jobs, in order to protect the Canadian economy and make it grow for everyone.
That's right. Hear, hear. The honourable member for Simcoe North.
The Prime Minister's economic report card is in. Canadians have the highest consumer debt in the G7. House prices have doubled. Per capita income is lower today than it was 10 years ago, and the average Canadian makes $30,000 less than their American counterpart. All as a result of this Prime Minister's economic vandalism. And in the face of economic uncertainty and global trade imbalances, this Prime Minister's plan is to increase taxes on job creators, entrepreneurs, and farmers. Will he enact a Canada First plan and stop these tax increases to keep our jobs and investment at home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Maybe that Conservative member missed the memo. We're actually taking federal taxes off, Mr. Speaker. We're taking the GST off of everyday goods in order to help Canadians. We are wondering on this side of the House how the Conservatives could be against a tax break for Canadians. This will put more money back in their pockets, Mr. Speaker, right around the holidays when they need it most. Mr. Speaker, this policy is good for Canadians. It's good for the economy. It's just bad for Conservatives.
The honourable member from Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, if the government doesn't want to listen to Conservatives, maybe they'll listen to economists at National Bank who found that real GDP has contracted 4% since 2022. This is unprecedented outside of a recession. It's a made in Canada, per person GDP recession caused by the economic vandalism of this Prime Minister's policies, whose only plan is to increase taxes on everybody, farmers, physicians, entrepreneurs, and all people who want to invest in Canada. When will the Prime Minister enact a Canada First plan to keep jobs and investment in Canada and our Canadians at home?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
What my honourable colleague doesn't quite understand is that we do have a Canada First policy. That's why we have the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7. That is why we have a AAA credit rating. That is why we have inflation being decreased not once, not twice, but 3 times to 1.6% in September, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, we have supports for Canadian, for example, the tax holiday and supports for 18 million workers come this spring, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we have the balance right, and we have a Canada First policy for Canadians.
The honourable member from Chilliwack Hope.
After 9 years, we need a Canada First plan to fix what this Prime Minister has broken. Our standard of living has plummeted compared to the United States. The last thing Canada needs is a capital gains tax hike on our farmers, doctors, home builders and small businesses, but that's exactly what this Prime Minister is proposing. His tax hikes will drive investment, jobs, doctors and food production out of this country at a time when we can least afford it, with the threat of U.S. tariffs on the horizon. Why won't the Prime Minister stop making things worse and cancel his reckless tax increases on Canadian jobs and investment?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
It was this Liberal government that reduced taxes on the middle class not once, but twice, Mr. Speaker, and the Conservatives opposed that measure on both occasions. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're coming with a tax break for the holidays. That's going to mean more money in the pockets of Canadians, and yet again, the Conservatives are opposing this measure. Mr. Speaker, do the Conservatives really believe the talking points that they're saying? Mr. Speaker, if they did, they would vote in favour of a tax break for Canadians. That's what we've put on the table. How are they going to vote?
The honourable member for Chilliwack Hope.
Taxing farmers drives up food costs. Taxing doctors means it's harder to find one. Taxing home builders means fewer homes. Taxing small businesses means fewer paychecks. Raising capital taxes means less investment in the tools we need to halt the decline in our standard of living. Jobs and livelihoods are on the line. With the threat of U.S. tariffs coming down the tracks, will the Prime Minister give Canadian workers a fighting chance by cancelling his destructive tax increases on jobs and investment?
Hear, hear. Common sense. The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I like very much the member, but let me inform him about a couple of things. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to jobs and investment, Canada received the largest investment in Onta's history, Mr. Speaker, $19 billion, the largest investment in 75 years. Canada also received the largest investment in Dow Chemicals history, 127 years, Mr. Speaker, an investment of $10 billion in Alberta. Mr. Speaker, we received the largest investment in 139 years of BHP in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, $22 billion. Canada is the envy of the world, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk up Canada and stop saying things.
The Honourable Member for Oxford.
Mr. Speaker, we have learned from this government's own immigration documents that nearly 5 million people will have their temporary visas expire next year. The Minister of Immigration was asked for his plan in committee yesterday, but he had no plan. Can the Prime Minister correct his minister and tell us his plan to enforce and ensure that the nearly 5 million people that leave Canada when their visas expire next year?
The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees.
Let's examine the latest round of hysteria from the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about 4.9 million documents that apply, sometimes many to one person. These are tourists. These are people, the vast majority of whom leave the country, including artists that come to this country, including Bruce Springsteen and others. Meanwhile, when people's visas expire, Mr. Speaker, they are expected to leave. If they are not, they will be removed at the same time the Leader of the Opposition is walking around with the member of Edmonton Millwoods promising not to deport people.
The Honourable Member for Oxford.
Mr. Speaker, again, there's no plan from this minister. And after 9 years of breaking our immigration system, his plan is to ask them to leave nicely. And now they're staring at 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods that will crush our Canadian workers and cripple our economy. We need a Canada First plan that fixes the immigration system and ensures that the 5 million people will leave when their visas expire next year. When will we see that plan?
Good.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees.
Mr. Speaker, again, we see now the Conservatives' rollover first program. They're talking about people that are here that do routinely leave the country. They come in as tourists. It includes a vast array of people. He's answering an OPQ question that they posed us. We were very precise in the answers they gave it. Sometimes it's not 5 million people, Mr. Speaker. It's a number of documents attached to the same person. So let's park the hysteria. Let's talk about real things. Let's talk about the managed plan to migration that is actually doing very well in this country, according to Canadians.
Hear, hear.